Every time I tried to visit my family, my husband guilt-tripped me into staying home. I thought he was just insecure, until I discovered he was rewriting my texts, pretending to be me, insulting them so they'd stop reaching out. He isolated himself instead. The first time I realized something was wrong, it wasn't during an argument. It was during a quiet Sunday morning. My mother had called asking if I could come over for lunch. I was already halfway dressed, my shoes by the door, when he appeared in the hallway, pale and holding his stomach. "You're really going to leave me like this?" he asked, his voice weak, almost theatrical. I froze. His words weren't loud, but they carried weight. I hesitated, then slipped off my shoes and sat back down. That was the beginning of the walls he built around me. At first, I convinced myself it was just insecurity. He didn't have many friends, and he often said I was the only person he could rely on. So when he sighed and muttered things like, "You care more about them than me," I brushed it off as a sign of vulnerability. I thought it meant he loved me too much, that he was afraid of losing me. But slowly those comments became sharper, more deliberate. Whenever I mentioned visiting my family, he found a way to make me feel guilty. "Do you really need to go again? Didn't you just see them last month?" Or, "I guess I'll just sit here alone while you have fun." His tone was always casual, but the message was clear. I was abandoning him. And I hated that word. Abandoning. It made me feel selfish, even cruel, for wanting something as simple as dinner with my parents. The excuses grew stronger over time. If I planned a visit, he suddenly felt sick. If I mentioned a holiday gathering, he claimed he had work stress and needed me home. Once, on the morning of my father's birthday, he pretended to have chest pains. I panicked, canceled my plans, and stayed by his side all day. Later, when I suggested seeing a doctor, he waved me off. "I'm fine now. I just needed rest." But deep down, I knew it wasn't about his health. It was about control. I began canceling more and more. Family dinners, birthdays, even Christmas. Each time I told myself I was keeping peace at home. I didn't want to fight, didn't want to hear him accuse me of choosing them over him. But every cancellation left me torn, ashamed, and quietly resentful. My family's voices on the phone grew softer, their invitations less frequent. They didn't understand why I kept saying no. And I didn't know how to explain it without sounding disloyal to my husband. The arguments were the worst. Whenever I tried to explain my need to see my family, he twisted my words. "So you're saying I'm not enough for you?" he'd snap. Or, "If you loved me, you wouldn't keep running back to them." His accusations cut deep because they made me question myself. Was I being unfair? Was I failing him as a wife? I started second-guessing every decision, every plan, until the idea of visiting my family felt like betrayal. One evening, I gathered the courage to insist. "I need to see them," I said firmly. "It's been months." His face hardened. "Go then," he said coldly. "But don't expect me to be here when you get back." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I stayed home. The isolation crept in quietly like fog. At first, I didn't notice it. I told myself I was just busy, that life had changed, that marriage required sacrifices. But soon, the quiet evenings became unbearable. I sat alone in the living room, scrolling through old photos of family gatherings, wondering why they seemed so distant now. My phone rarely rang. Invitations stopped coming. And I didn't realize it then, but the cracks in my relationships were being carefully engineered. There were small incidents that added to the weight. Like the time my sister dropped by unexpectedly, and he greeted her with forced politeness, then sulked for hours after she left. Or the time my mother sent me a care package and he sneered, "They're trying to buy your attention." Each moment chipped away at my connection to them, until I felt torn between loyalty to my husband and love for my family. I remember one night vividly. I was sitting on the porch, the air cool against my skin, when my father called. His voice was gentle, but I could hear the hurt beneath it. "We miss you," he said simply. I swallowed hard, unable to explain why I hadn't been around. I wanted to tell him everything, that every plan was met with guilt, that every visit felt like betrayal, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I promised I'd come soon. But I didn't. Inside the house, my husband watched me closely. "What did they say?" he asked. I hesitated, then lied. "Just checking in." He nodded, satisfied, and I realized how much of myself I had already surrendered. The walls he built weren't physical, but they were strong. They were made of guilt, manipulation, and silence. And I was trapped inside, convincing myself it was love, when in reality it was control. The nights grew quieter, the distance heavier. I sat alone, wondering why my family seemed so far away, unaware that he had been carefully pulling the strings all along. The quiet evenings had become unbearable, but nothing prepared me for the night I uncovered the truth. I was sitting at the dining table scrolling through my phone when I noticed something odd. My sister's name appeared in the message thread, but the tone of her words was sharp, defensive, so unlike her. "Why would you say that to me?" she had written. "I never thought you'd speak to me like this." My heart raced. I scrolled up and there it was. A message supposedly from me calling her selfish, accusing her of meddling in my marriage. Words I would never say. My fingers trembled as I read them, each sentence a dagger. I felt sick. I opened another thread, this time with my mother. Again the same pattern. Messages filled with coldness, sarcasm, even insults. "Stop trying to control me," one read. "I don't need your advice." My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't written any of it. The realization hit me like a wave. He had been rewriting my texts, pretending to be me, sending cruel words to the people I loved most. My stomach twisted as I imagined my family reading those messages, believing they came from me, wondering why I had turned so bitter. I sat frozen, staring at the screen, disbelief flooding me. Anger followed, hot and consuming. And then heartbreak, the kind that leaves you hollow. He hadn't just kept me from them physically. He had poisoned the very bridge between us. When he walked into the room, I was still holding the phone, my face pale, my hands shaking. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice sharp, louder than I intended. He glanced at the screen, then shrugged as if it were nothing. "I was protecting you," he said calmly. "They don't care about you the way I do. I had to make them back off." "Protecting me?" I repeated, my voice trembling with fury. "By insulting them? By pretending to be me?" He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, his expression smug. "You don't understand. They were interfering. Always pulling you away. I had to make them stop." I stared at him, searching for remorse, but there was none. His words twisted the truth, painting betrayal as devotion. "You lied," I whispered. "You made them think I hated them." "They'll get over it," he said casually. "Now they'll leave us alone. Isn't that what you wanted? Peace. Peace." The word felt like poison. I wanted family, connection, love, not isolation built on lies. My chest tightened and I felt tears prick my eyes, though I refused to let them fall. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, replaying every cancelled visit, every unanswered call, every awkward silence from my family. It all made sense now. They hadn't stopped reaching out because they didn't care. They had stopped because they thought I didn't want them. Because of him. The next morning I picked up the phone and called my mother. My voice shook as I explained. "I didn't write those messages," I said. "It wasn't me." There was a pause, then a soft gasp. We thought you didn't want us anymore," she whispered. "We couldn't understand why you were so cruel." My throat tightened. It was him. He pretended to be me. He sent those words. Silence hung heavy, then my mother's voice returned, filled with both hurt and relief. "I knew something wasn't right. I knew those weren't your words." I called my sister next. She sounded cautious at first, but when I explained, her tone softened. "I was so confused," she admitted. "I thought I'd lost you. I'm glad you told me." Each conversation was painful, but it was also healing. My family's confusion turned into understanding, their hurt into relief. They hadn't been abandoned. They had been silenced just like me. When I confronted him again, his mask slipped. "So you told them," he said bitterly. "Now they'll hate me." "They don't hate you," I replied coldly. "They see you for what you are." His scheme had backfired. Instead of isolating me, he had isolated himself. My family rallied around me, their support stronger than ever. They exposed his lies, refused to play along, and made it clear they wouldn't let him control me anymore. I watched him unravel in small ways. He sulked when I answered their calls, scowled when I left to visit them, snapped when I laughed at my sister's jokes. The control he once held slipped through his fingers and he didn't know how to handle it. One evening he tried again to twist the narrative. "I only did it because I love you," he said, his voice softer, almost pleading. "I didn't want to lose you." I looked at him, really looked, and saw the truth. It wasn't love. It was fear, control, manipulation. "You lost me the moment you decided to lie," I said firmly. His face hardened, but I didn't flinch. For the first time I felt stronger than his words. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also opened my eyes. I saw the walls he built, the lies he told, the strings he pulled. And I knew I would never let him silence me again. His face had hardened when I told him he had lost me, but I didn't flinch. For the first time I felt stronger than his words. That strength didn't vanish when the argument ended. It stayed with me quietly like a flame I refused to let die. The next morning I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I picked up my phone, not with hesitation but with determination. I dialed my mother's number, and when she answered, her voice carried warmth I hadn't allowed myself to hear in so long. "Come over," she said simply. And this time I didn't make excuses. I didn't glance at him for approval. I put on my shoes, walked out the door, and drove to my parents' house. The moment I stepped inside, the smell of my mother's cooking wrapped around me like a blanket. My father looked up from his chair, his eyes soft, and my sister rushed forward, pulling me into a hug. I hadn't realized how much I missed that embrace until it happened. For the first time in months I felt like myself again. That visit was the first of many. Each time I went I carried less guilt. The heavy voice in my head whispering that I was abandoning him grew quieter, replaced by laughter, conversation, and the comfort of being surrounded by people who loved me without conditions. I cooked meals with my siblings, chopping vegetables side by side, laughing at old jokes. I sat with my father on the porch, listening to his stories, the kind that always ended with a chuckle. These small victories felt monumental. They were pieces of my life I had thought were gone, now returned to me. At home he sulked. He asked where I had been, why I stayed so long, why I didn't answer his texts immediately. But his questions no longer carried the same weight. I answered calmly, without fear. "I was with my family," I said. And I didn't apologize. The more I reclaimed my time, the more I reclaimed my voice. I began speaking openly about what had happened, first with close friends, then with others who asked why I had disappeared for so long. At first, the words were hard to say. "He pretended to be me," I whispered to Sarah one evening. "He sent those messages." Her eyes widened, her hand reached for mine, and she said, "You didn't deserve that." Those conversations gave me courage. Then I shared my story more widely. I wrote about it carefully, honestly, and the response was overwhelming. People reached out, telling me they had faced similar manipulation, that they too had been silenced. My pain became more than just mine. It became a voice for others. And in sharing it, I found confidence I hadn't known I still had. His downfall unfolded quietly in the background. The control he once held slipped away, and he couldn't stop it. My family no longer believed his lies. My friends saw through his charm. He was left standing alone while I stood surrounded by support. Watching him lose what he valued most, control, wasn't something I celebrated with cruelty. It was something I acknowledged with calm. Revenge didn't need shouting or confrontation. It was in the way I lived freely, in the way I laughed again, in the way I chose my own path without his permission. One evening I sat at my parents' table, the room filled with chatter and clinking dishes. My mother leaned over and said softly, "You're glowing again." I smiled, realizing she was right. The heaviness that had once clouded me was gone. I was lighter, freer, stronger. I began to notice joy in routines that had once felt heavy. Walking through the park, I breathed deeply, savoring the crisp air. Shopping for clothes, I chose colors I loved, not ones he approved. Cooking dinner, I seasoned dishes the way I wanted, filling the kitchen with aromas that reminded me of home. Each act was small, but together they rebuilt me. The more I embraced this freedom, the more I reflected on self-worth. I realized how easily it can be stolen when you let someone else define it. For years, I had allowed his words to shape my choices, his guilt to dictate my actions. But now I understood. My worth wasn't his to decide. It wasn't tied to his approval, his control, or his manipulation. It was mine, and it had always been mine. One night, I sat alone by the window watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I thought about everything: the isolation, the betrayal, the silence, the recovery. And I realized something important. The end of his isolation wasn't just his downfall. It was my beginning. His attempt to cut me off from the world had failed, and in failing, it had given me back my voice. I whispered to myself, never again. Never again would I let someone build walls around me. Never again would I let guilt dictate my choices. Never again would I allow manipulation to silence me. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I had reclaimed my voice, my family, my freedom. And as I sat there, the quiet no longer heavy but peaceful, I knew I had finally risen from the ashes of his control.